Today, visitors to the Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area see a calm lake. Before the Yellowtail Dam was built during the 1960s, it was a much different place. Rough. Dangerous. Wild. For thousands of years, prehistoric peoples bypassed the untamed river on the Bad Pass Trail. Mountain men who trapped for fur in the area also used the Bad Pass Trail to avoid the dangers of taking their year's work down the unforgiving waterway. Jim Bridger, the famous Western explorer, floated the river in 1825, making him the first European to record the harrowing ride. Bridger told of the majestic Bighorn Canyon, with walls and arches so steep that they seemed to block out the sun. The river flowed, swirling between calm water with banks and streams, and at times moving so fast through the narrow valleys and rocks it seemed that Bridger was floating atop foam. In 1913, three men, Doc Barry, Claude St. John, and Dilbert Smith, as a publicity stunt, traveled from Barry's Dude Ranch in Montana to New Orleans. The roughest part of their journey was from Hillsboro to Hardin, Montana.
We had many narrow escapes as the boat seemed to touch rock after rock as she dipped her bows into the eddies, while the turbulent water threw spray so thick the other occupants of the boat could not be seen. Jumped in a hole and out again, drowned the engine and ignition, swamped the boat half a dozen times and had to bail her out.
Traveling through the Bighorn Canyon was a harrowing and dangerous practice which only the stoutest of adventurers accomplished, but that didn't stop people from trying. In the late 1940s, Bernard Pease and his brothers went elk hunting in the canyon and found out firsthand how treacherous the river could be.
We come around this corner and there were some elk right there, so we pulled the boat over. My one brother shot a bull, a big bull, so we went to our boat with the elk behind us and we started down the canyon again. All of a sudden, we heard them rapids again, and that boat just made a complete turnaround. Now there's a wave coming up over the top of our boat. It was pulling it that fast. So we turned a corner, and one of our tent poles hit a rock, and that cut a hole in the one boat, and then the boat went down.
Bernard and his brothers walked out of the canyon. Their story made national headlines, but they were not the last to feel the wrath of the canyon's treacherous waters. In the late 1940s, not long after the Pease brothers nearly met their end, Jack Pearson and three friends with no rough water rafting experience tried their hand at the Bighorn Canyon. It nearly proved deadly.
We didn't have any trouble at all till the last day at Black Canyon. We hit turbulent water that we couldn't handle and just flipped the boat over and capsized. Willis Guthrie couldn't swim. He was wearing a Mae West life jacket. He was under the boat, and the first thing he did was pull the ripcord, and it plastered him up against the bottom of the boat and he couldn't find his way out. We finally found his legs and pulled him up to the shore, laid him on his stomach, beat on his back, and water just came pouring out of him. He was in trouble.
Despite the near-death experiences of members of the Pease and Pearson crews, floaters continued risking their lives on the rapids of the Bighorn River. Jim Hamilton of Decker, Montana, and Tom Ringley of Bighorn, Wyoming, floated the river in the 1950s and early 60s, before the Yellowtail Dam was built. They clearly remember the sound of the rapids.
But I remember that you could hear these rapids roaring up ahead, but you couldn't see them because there might be a sheer wall. Then the canyon would turn 90 degrees, and you come on the rapids and you go through them, but you could really hear them roar. It was a fun trip.
Floating the Bighorn River wasn't all danger. It usually took 3 days to complete the trip, so camping was required. Camping would be a peaceful experience. Jim Hamilton described feeling like the only person on the planet while sleeping under the night sky.
When you're talking about laying around at night, I can remember we had no tent. We were just in our bedrolls, our sleeping bags.
Camping in the canyon before the dam offered views of wildlife that most people rarely got to see.
During our 1954 Bighorn Canyon trip, And while we camped at the mouth of Black Canyon, Durfee and I climbed the south wall of Black Canyon and covered a good bit of the area between Black and Bull Elk Canyons. As well as seeing several hundred buffalo, we jumped some very, very good buck deer. The following day, we all went up on top and all saw many buffalo.
Bob Musgrave wasn't alone when he first rafted the river. Howard Hohenfinger, John T. Fuller, Bert Miller, Hollis Hohenfinger, Dewey Aiken, Dutch Hollisher, Arden Durfee, and Johnny Hohenfinger braved the river with him during 2 trips in the mid-1950s. Not all the animals seen were desirable ones, Ralph Bond recalls.
First thing that happened when we got out of the boat was we come on a rattlesnake. We had to sleep there that night. One of the guys, he wouldn't sleep on the ground. He got in the boat and slept in the boat.
David D. Thompson Jr., the expedition commander of the last float trip before the dam was completed in the 1960s, described the smell of breakfast cooking in the canyon while waking up the morning after the first day of floating.
The first night, the group camped at Barry's Landing. It was a beautiful place to camp, and although nature dampened our spirits somewhat during the day and following morning, the aroma of coffee cooking in the open and the smell of eggs, pancakes, and syrup permeated the air. Most everyone awakened with a ravenous appetite, which was quickly assuaged by our chief cook, Wes Meeker. There was a general consensus of opinion by those who were queried that Wes did a fine job. I gained 3¼ pounds on a trip that should have probably pulled some of the beef from around many of our rotund little figures.
Floating and camping in the canyon also showed people the remains of days gone by. Floaters saw traces left behind by prehistoric people and those who had tried mining the canyon. Most campers brought food for their trip through the canyon, but could always rely on catching fish. There were numerous streams leading into the canyon and the river in the days before the dam was completed. Trout were in abundance in those days. Fishing was also just a great way to relax after the wild ride of the rapids.
That was the campsite the first night. It was a good little fishing stream back up there and pretty good campsite at Devil's Canyon.
I'd fished the river somewhat with my father in the early 60s. Before the dam, there was catfish laying, carp, suckers. If we went up high, where Fort Smith is now, to the old headgate where they took out the irrigation water, you could occasionally catch a brown trout. There weren't very many, but if you caught one, it was something that you talked about.
Some people hated to see the dam tame the river because they wanted the wild river to run free forever. But others knew that the dam would provide recreation, electricity, flood control, and water for irrigating farms. Every positive has a negative, just as every negative has a positive.
Most of the people were for it. They could see the need for water storage, and then when they could see that the side benefit was boating, fishing, and what have you.
Then about in the mid-60s, they started construction on the Yellowtail Dam, which was a big economic impact to the area. Hardin prospered very well due to the construction of the dam. That's when the little town of Fort Smith came about. There were 3 or 4 gas stations, a couple grocery stores, a couple of cafes. I mean, Fort Smith was a bustling little construction camp.
No, I think the dam is great. It provides a lot of power and recreation. Recreation for a lot of people who wouldn't make that float trip. I used to have a 25-foot cabin cruiser that we'd use when some of my friends came to Lovell and put it in and spend a couple nights on the lake. That was a good trip.
Although the lake took away the exhilarating rides down the rough river, it provides opportunities for improving the economy of the area. It also provides visitors with a chance to see the canyon from the inside, which many people couldn't before the lake existed. Only the stout river rats were able to see inside of the canyon before the dam. The best way to see Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area is by taking a boat ride on the lake through the beautiful canyon walls.
Washed deep by the raging river, Did you ever see the Bighorn Canyon at the breaking of a brand new day, with the clouds hanging down from the mountains and a cowboy kneeling to pray?